In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel.
And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men."
And he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things.
"Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him.
Take heart, I have overcome the world.
And rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm.
He saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, and healed their sick.
Do you want to be healed?
I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst.
And all were astonished at the majesty of God.
Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them.
I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
It is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
He is not here, for he has risen, as he said.
Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age.
If you are middle school on down, you can head off to your classrooms. And as I often like to point out, just take a look at the stampede of children out of this auditorium. What an amazing, amazing privilege it is to have that many young lives here every Sunday. That is fantastic. Well, my name is Brad. I have the honor and pleasure of being one of the elders here, and then also one of the people that stand up here from time to time, and have the privilege to preach. Today, we're going to be in Mark 6, verses 30 through 44. So, if you want to go ahead and turn there, we'll jump in there in just a second. I'm fired up for this morning. I really am. And if you would have asked me 2 days ago, I probably wouldn't have said that. I probably would have said I was dreading this morning because this is a message that honestly I wrestled mightily with God on this message. I wrestled mightily with Him, and because in preparing and what the Holy Spirit was putting on my heart, what I kept saying over and over again was, surely you're not wanting me to say this. Surely you're not wanting me to go there. God, this is a message on the feeding of the 5,000. This is supposed to be a happy, fun, Jesus provides everything you need type of message. Clean and easy, right? Everybody goes home happy and in awe of the work of Christ. And while all of that is true, and hopefully all of that comes out in the message today, it's in the buildup to the feeding of the 5,000 that we're actually going to spend quite a bit of time on. Because it's all too often very much skipped over, right? The little things are often skipped over. The things we don't want to confront or don't seem like a big deal to us, right? We focus on the glamour of the miracle, but we don't focus on the way Jesus lived and the way Jesus expected his disciples to live. It would have been really easy to get up here and give you 25 minutes with some anecdotes on why Jesus provides more than you need when you ask him. It would have been really easy to skip over all of the other things to get to that point. And but if we treat this Jesus series like that, if we treat this Jesus series as just focusing on the glamorous things, what we're going to do is end up painting a picture on Jesus being somebody who always just does what you want and gives you what you need, and not king to be submitted to. And if we do that, we will have failed you as teachers from this stage. So, on that cheery note, we are in the middle of the portion of this Jesus series where we are focusing on his words and works. So we're talking about a lot of miracles. We're talking about a lot of different things that Jesus has done. And I want to do just a quick review on what the purpose of the miracles are. Right? The purpose of the miracles, everything that Jesus does, every miracle Jesus performs, points to his deity, points to his rule over creation, points to his authorship of everything in this world. And so you see these different categories of miracles that point to him being Lord over creation, being Lord over sin, being Lord over death. Everything points in that direction. It points to a life and a world that can be transformed. We just witnessed a miracle this morning, right? The miracle of Jesus looking down and saying, "That one's mine," right? The miracle of a life and a heart and a spirit that was dead is now alive, right? That is a miracle. The miracles all point to Jesus' deity. I also like the way Warren Wiersbe puts it. He says that the miracles are a manifestation of Jesus' glory. They are a manifestation of the glory that is all there. Remember, I said back in December, there is no middle ground with Jesus. He has been telling us who he is this entire time. It is for us to see and acknowledge what that is. Because there is no question who Jesus is. And the miracles are further evidence of that truth. And so, today we're going to jump into the feeding of the 5,000 and everything that kind of leads up to that. And so, as we've been doing over the course of the past year, I'm going to invite you, if you are able, to join me in standing as we read Mark 6, 30 through 44. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. When it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated. So, feeding of the 5,000, right? It's one of those stories, like I can still see the felt board in my Sunday school class growing up, right? I'm seeing some of you were Baptist growing up. I love it. Okay, I see a lot of heads nodding. Okay, I see the felt board in class growing up with Jesus feeding the 5,000, right? This is one of those stories. It's one of the first stories that you're told, right? Jesus fed 5,000 men. But what's interesting is the way Mark writes this in chapter 6. This comes at a place where it's after another feast, because what Mark did was very intentional. The 12 disciples have just come back from their journey, one where they called people to repentance, cast out demons, and healed the sick. They had done, or God had done, amazing things through them. Now they had come back, and Jesus immediately wants to provide for them and provide rest for them. So that's how chapter 6 starts, is the 12 being sent out and doing all these great works. And then sandwiched between their missionary trip and the feeding of the 5,000, there's this interesting account of a feast of a different kind. In your Bibles, the header is probably saying the death of John the Baptist. Mark includes an account of how and why John the Baptist dies. And it happened at a feast. And what this gives us is a stark contrast between the kind of feast the kings and rulers of the day would throw and the kind of feast that Jesus would provide for his people. Right? One feast was extravagance, right? Herod wanted to throw himself a party. So he invited every powerful person, everybody from around, anybody who was anybody was coming to this feast. And he had all the trappings, all the food you could want, everything. He had entertainment. He had all of these different things. And the result of that feast was the death of John the Baptist. If you read in the account, right, the girl who performed at the party told him, because he said, "I'll give you anything you want," and she said, "I want John the Baptist's head on a platter." And Herod's feast, extravagant, lustful, self-indulgent, ended in the death of an innocent man. And as we're going to talk about today, the feast Jesus provided, it was simple, it was impactful, and it provided what his people needed. And so generally speaking, Mark focuses most of what he includes in his gospel account on proving that Jesus is exactly who he said he is. Everything, every story, every sequence, everything points to that. Jesus is both God and man. The feeding of the 5,000 displays this perfectly because we get to see in one account both Jesus' humanity and his deity. So Jesus' disciples have returned back to him. And he immediately instructs them to go to a desolate place away from the crowds and find rest. Verses 30 and 31, right? Say, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure." These guys came back from this intense, long journey, this intense missionary trip, right? They were exhausted. And they came back, and people were around. Because Jesus was there, they couldn't get any respite where they were. They could not get any rest where they were. And so he had set up this plan to provide them rest. And it was a good one, right? He wanted to care for his disciples, right? And allow them to recuperate. So they loaded up into a boat and sailed to where they thought they would be alone. But that was not going to be the case. Large crowds apparently tracked where the boat was going and followed them to where they were going. Like, surprise, we're here, right? And can you imagine how annoyed you would be? I mean, really, don't they know how exhausted you are? Right? Don't they know boundaries? One of our favorite words. Don't they know how much we need to rest? Here's the thing. That's not how Jesus reacted as well, at all. He had set up this plan. He had set up this, he wanted to serve and love his disciples well, and the people in that area completely blew up that plan. And so from our perspective, Jesus would have been perfectly justified in shooing them away, in telling them that, hey, they need rest, leave them alone, come back later, right? In fact, we probably would have said that was the right thing to do, not just justified. But Jesus didn't prioritize his plans over the people. He prioritized people over his plan. The passage says that Jesus had compassion on the crowd. Mark actually uses the Greek word that can be translated into gut-wrenching. Like he had this gut-wrenching feeling when he saw them. He viewed them as sheep without a shepherd, according to Mark. And this is a common theme throughout the Gospels. The leper in Mark 1, the two blind men in Matthew 20, the widow of Nain in Luke 7, and later on in Mark when he does another miracle with the feeding of the 4,000. All of these instances caused Jesus to divert plans to care for those right in front of him. Jesus submitted his and his disciples' hunger for food and rest for an even deeper hunger, the hunger for the restoration of the people in front of him. That is what drove him. And so, the first kind of tough question that I need to ask us today: what does it take to be driven by compassion? On the surface, that seems like one of those, quaint coffee cup, Christian sayings, right? Be driven by compassion, be compassionate. But when you actually drill down into what it takes and what it means to be driven by compassion, y'all, that is one of the scariest questions in the Christian walk. It is one of the scariest questions that we can ask ourselves because compassion forces us to stop. Compassion forces us to change and challenge our priorities. It is in moments that draw us to be compassionate where we are confronted with the reality that the call of the gospel is not simply just to do good deeds, not simply just to love people, but to die to ourselves at every single moment. To die to our wants, to die to our needs, to die to what we think is right, and submit them to the call of the gospel. And only then will we be able to see people in the same way that Jesus saw them, with compassion. But when we don't view people that way, what do they become? They become a hurdle to get over in the course of your day. Now, the way that this tends to play out in my life, lest I sound like I am borrowing from Jason's famous left-hand turn analogy, let me tell you a little bit about myself. If you ever, and this is something that Lauren will definitely confirm, if you ever happen to see my mugshot on any news headline, I guarantee you what that headline is. Man loses his mind at Costco and runs over people with his cart. Okay? I mean, seriously, do we really need to go 4 wide down the aisle? Right? Right? I get to Costco, and as Lauren will tell me, don't go to Costco, honey, because you turn into a bad person. Okay? Right? I'm there with a mission, I'm there with a plan, and all of you that are walking slower than me in the aisle, you are just in my way. Right? Because I want to get out of here as fast as I possibly can, because if I stay here longer, I'm spending $700. Right? Right? So like that is me, right? People become the interruption to my day. Now, Costco, that's kind of a silly analogy or a silly example, but how often does that creep its way into the rest of the more meaningful parts of our lives? Right? Where we have set up this plan, when we prioritize our plans over everything else, especially people, we put a governor on the gospel work that can be done through us. Gospel work often happens in the moments that our plans get blown up. You can tell how much you've grasped the gospel by how you treat the people who ruin your day. If your response to an interruption is anger, you're probably worshiping your schedule. If your response is love and compassion, you're probably worshiping Christ. Now, I know I'm talking to a lot of parents in this room. Who's the biggest source of your day getting blown up? Right? Because you're not the only one who wakes up in your house with an agenda for your day. Right? You're not. Right? Every child in your house wakes up with their agenda for how the day is going to go. Right? And how quickly, right, we as parents can jump into anger because they should know, right? This is our routine, right? This is what we do. But we also tend to pack our schedules so tightly that we have no room for anything else. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well, but I had a mentor once back about 10, 15 years ago who he drilled into my brain this concept of reactive capacity, right? If you pack your schedule so full that you cannot say yes without giving up something else, right? You're not leaving room for the ability to say yes at a moment's notice. You're not leaving room for that. You are packing things so full that there's no space for gospel work to fit in. I'm going to lean on that a little bit more later, because when we tend to see people as interruptions to our work, as interruptions to these things we need to do, this job I need to complete, this this event I need to go to. My child needs to be on this team. They need to go to that practice. They need to be on that club. I need to get this promotion at work. I need to save up to be able to buy that house, to purchase that car. Right? When that becomes our priority, people have no other place to be than an interruption in our day. Because that's the goal, that's the priority. And they become an obstacle to get over. And when we see people as interruptions to that, we are not seeing them as Jesus sees them, because to Jesus, people were the work. So if your schedule is so tight that there's no room for the broken, you aren't following the Jesus of the gospel. You are following the American dream with a Christian veneer. Y'all, that hit me like a ton of bricks this week. Because how often do we fill every moment of our schedule and we convince ourselves that we're doing the right thing because we're being productive? Meanwhile, we don't even know the name of our neighbor who's suffering, who's going through whatever it is they're going through. We don't have time for them. That convicts me probably more than anybody else in this room. As we go on in verse 35, and when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. All right, so put yourselves in the disciples' shoes. They reacted in a completely rational way from our perspective. Okay? There's a lot of people. There's nothing to eat here. Jesus, send them away to go find something to eat so they can take care of themselves. And then Jesus' response, I wish I could have seen their faces, right? Jesus' response is, you give them something to eat, right? Like, wait, what? What? Like, and again, 5,000 people, that was likely just the 5,000 men. We're not even counting all of the families that were with them, right? So a huge crowd, right? And 200 denarii was about 2/3 of a year's wage, right? That's what it was going to cost to feed these people. So this would have been crazy. There was no way they could have done it. And so they ask him if, Jesus, am I hearing you right? Is this what you want? Right? Is that actually what you want? And his response, I love his response. His response is simply, what do you have? What is it that you have? This was the plan all along. Jesus wanted to see if they had gotten it yet, if they finally understood that he was the one who provided for all of their needs, that he could satisfy every need. Had their faith grown to the point where they finally fully believed that Jesus is who he says he is? But we have such a tendency to be myopic in our view of the Christian life because we ask this question, a version of this question all the time. Jesus, do you really expect me to give up that? Do you really expect me to not take that promotion, to not take this vacation, to not push my kids to get on this sports team, in this club, in that school, whatever the that is? We are constantly asking, do you really expect me to give up that? And there's two lies that this question tends to be based on. Lie number one is that the outcome depends solely on us, right? We think if God's asking us to do this, then it must just depend on me. And then lie number two, and this might be the more insidious one, is that what Jesus asks us to give up was ours to keep in the first place. We don't think of ourselves as stewards, we think of ourselves as owners. And that mindset is one of the biggest lies that we tell ourselves. And sometimes we just feel like we don't have enough. Sometimes we feel like we're not enough. We tell God we'll serve him once our quote unquote bank account is where we think it should be, right? Whether that's emotional, financial, spiritual, right? And all Jesus says is, hand me your empty wallet. Bring what you have. God is not looking for your ability, he's looking for your availability. See, he didn't need the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, right? He owns the fields, he created them. He didn't need that. He was inviting them along for the ride. He was inviting them along to see what he was going to do. So the disciples surveyed the crowd and they brought food to see who brought food and supplies with them. And John's account tells us that they found a boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Now imagine being the boy. You were the prepared one, right? You were the one who actually came prepared for anything, really, right? And these disciples are walking around and they're asking people, do you have food? Do you have food? Do you have food? Everybody's saying no. Then all of a sudden he's standing there with his basket of 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he's like, well, sure, I have food, right? I don't know what it's going to do for 5,000 people or whatever the number actually was, right? It would have been very easy to be like, well, this isn't going to do anything to feed these people, so I might as well keep it for myself, right? I don't have enough to give to solve this problem, so I might as well just keep it for myself. And he doesn't do that. He gave it anyway. Because in that moment, Jesus was not asking for anything other than the boys and the disciples' obedience and faith. He was not asking him to be sufficient. Jesus demands your obedience and faith, not your sufficiency. This is difficult for us to connect with this idea because we don't see food or money or things like that really as our most precious resource because we have been so blessed to live where we live. It's probably not even in the top 10. We live in such prosperity that it's really not a big deal for us to think about giving up a meal. We do have a modern day equivalent, however, our most precious resource and the resource that we are so reluctant to give. And I previewed it earlier. That resource is time. We live in a time and in a society where it is easier for us to write a check than to give up our time. And how easy it is to schedule and overextend ourselves with our time. But I will tell you, there are two places in this world or in your life that will tell you where your priorities lie: your bank account and your calendar. If you do an audit of those two things, that will be a mirror to what you prioritize. We guard our whole blocks of time like they are precious gold. We have our me time and our productive time. But what if Jesus is asking you to break that schedule? What if the most gospel saturated moment of your week isn't the hour you spent perfectly executing your to do list, but the 10 minutes that were broken to listen to that neighbor? We often shoot ourselves in the foot right out of the gate because, yes, I know I am talking to many of you right now, and you are already going over in your head the 25 practices, the 6 music lessons, and the 4 games that you have this week, on top of making sure all the people in your house are fed. Right? Right? We tend to overextend ourselves with that. All it takes is one small hiccup, and the beautiful flow of your week gets torn apart. But you'll notice it is in the tearing apart that the miracle is done. Verse 41. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. The bread in its original state was sufficient for one boy. It was only through being torn apart that it became sufficient for a multitude. Many of us are praying for God to use us mightily, but we recoil in the moments that life starts to break us, whether through financial strain, through health issues, or the interruption to your week. But it is in the tearing of the bread that the miracle is found. And not only that, as the worship team begins to come up, the breaking of the bread was a forerunner for a much more glorious truth. It was a forerunner for the reality of Jesus saying, "This is my body broken for you." Tim Keller puts it this way: in the wilderness, Jesus broke the bread to give them life. On the cross, Jesus was the bread. He allowed his body to be broken so that the ultimate hunger, our hunger for God, could be satisfied forever. Everything points to Jesus being who he said he was. So stop apologizing for your 5 loaves and 2 fish. Your lack of time, your inability to teach, or your inability to give a lot of money, and just put them in the hands of Jesus. You see, Jesus wasn't merely just pulling a magic trick to prove he was God. He was displaying his authorship over creation and the harvest. He was shortcutting to accomplish in moments what would take 5 months to do through natural means. And if he can do that with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, imagine what he could do with you. Jesus was proving once again that he was the bread of life, that he was enough to satisfy the deepest of hungers, that he alone could provide what people need at their deepest level. And like that boy on that fateful afternoon, all we need to do is bring what we got. And Jesus just might do something crazy with it.